2020 should be a massive year for Bethesda. On paper, it is lined up to be pretty incredible, just game-wise, even over just the next few months, but there's also some inferences that can be drawn, some things that aren't quite confirmed that I think will make it even larger, even a bit better. If you guys missed my video yesterday, this is a part 2. In that video ending off 2019, I did a look back, a look at some of Bethesda's faults or how they kind of had a fall from grace in 2019. But now as a follow-up to start off the new year, I want to look forward and how this year could actually be one of their best and biggest. In this video, we're going to be going over what we know about some of their upcoming titles and why that gets me very excited, but also some things that are a little bit more speculative, but definitely things to look forward to. Including, of course, some details on Starfield, and in particular why I've been shifted. I feel more confident now than ever that a Starfield 2020 release date is plausible. So again, if you missed the past video, I encourage you to go back to that and then watch this one. But otherwise, even just in the first quarter of 2020, Bethesda has a lot on the way. We know for a fact that two things that are 100% confirmed are Wastelanders and Doom Eternal. Funny enough, these are actually two things that would have ended off 2019, but Bethesda delayed them. And that is, of course, one of the initial things that gets me excited. Bethesda sacrificed the end of 2019, missing out on these two major releases to hopefully give them to us in a more polished and release-ready state. That's something they absolutely should have done late in 2018 with the release of Fallout 76. So the fact that they are doing that now is a great way to kick off the new year. Wastelanders in Fallout 76 is much anticipated. Of course, all through 2019, and especially as I talked about in my video yesterday, Fallout 76 has been having a lot of problems. But I actually think, especially in the second half of the year, Fallout 76's Wastelanders DLC may have been the reason for some of those problems, and I'll explain why. From some comments from Bethesda employees, and even just from common sense, we now know that Wastelanders is actually a different build of Fallout 76. It's going to be a fairly comprehensive overhaul, adding in human NPCs, dialogue choices, and as described by Bethesda, a totally changed and evolved world. And as such, since they are working on it with a separate build, several bug fixes that probably would have come to the game to begin with were kind of pushed off or delayed to be shipped with Wastelanders. It's something we've heard about in the past, so it does get me hopeful that some of those lingering issues with the game may be fixed in a large update early in 2020. I also think Bethesda knows they have to get this right. Fallout 76, especially in the last quarter of 2019, had a lot in the way of negative press. Major hacking problems, just not a ton of content from the game, and the fact that they delayed this DLC does only get me more hopeful that it will have an additional level of polish. It'll launch more like their Battle Royale mode, which really didn't have many bugs. That is something Bethesda is clearly capable of, so hopefully we see it on display yet again. And although we don't know too many details about the size and scope of Wastelanders exactly, one thing we do know is this has been worked on for a very long time at this point. Bethesda describes how shortly after the release of Fallout 76, they realized they wanted to do something with human NPCs, and that's when Wastelanders was initially thought up. And the fact that we see some people skipping around on the roadmap all but confirms at that point that they knew this was coming. And it seems pretty likely that following the release of their first DLC wave, which most of the content finished around late April, a lot of work on Wastelanders did begin. There of course were some other updates to the game, the Battle Royale mode, the Vault 94 raids, and even some miscellaneous other limited time events. But this was few and far between, with the largest update of course being the Battle Royale mode and subsequent additions to it, but seemingly everything for that mode was actually made by a different studio, that was Bethesda Game Studios Dallas, leaving even more employees of the core Austin studio to work on Wastelanders. This gets me excited because it seems like it's been in development for a really long time, just not something they threw together in 4 months, but more of a 9-month or so production, especially considering how much we saw at E3 back in June, and the release date isn't even until 6+ months after that. And of course, the content itself is pretty exciting. They had a lot of time to work on human NPCs yet again, but also little things, like the fact that they're going back to Fallout 3's dialogue system, not Fallout 4's, which of course most of us don't really like. So I think this could be actually a fairly substantial and enjoyable piece of content. But even separately from that, something I don't see discussed all that often is that Wastelanders isn't all we're getting in Q1. That'll add in the new NPCs, new locations, new story. but even other updates like the legendary player system, multi-factor authentication, perk loadouts, a Steam release, a public test server, and potentially even the Vault 96 raids are all things expected or even explicitly described as coming in early 2020 by Bethesda. There should be a lot coming to this game over the next few months, and although I still do have a bit of wariness around Bethesda's ability to make it land successfully, and there are other lingering issues to address, hopefully we start to see some of those fixes come out with some of these major updates. But fortunately, with 2020, we don't have to put all our eggs in one basket. Even if Fallout 76 continues to miss and Wastelanders doesn't pan out or has way too many big asterisks around enjoying it, we have other things like Doom Eternal also coming in Q1 of 2020. Specifically on March 20th of 2020. This is another game that, although we know a decent amount about it, some of the new features, whether you like or dislike, the fact that this was just delayed gets me quite a bit more confident that the game will launch in a better state than it otherwise would have. Doom's one of those games, with me at least, that it doesn't have to be perfect, but as long as it's pretty good, you can get quite a bit of enjoyment out of it. And this one is bringing interesting new features, like the invasion mode, which is set to launch shortly after release, where you can invade other players' games as a playable demon, which should be a pretty big mix-up. Plus, thus far in 2019, the reception and reactions to this new Doom game, especially at E3 and QuakeCon, have been overwhelmingly positive. So that's what we know. The content confirmed to be coming in 2020 that should hopefully deliver, especially considering both of those things were just delayed. And that enough is actually a pretty good year for Bethesda. It has a chance at being even a better year than 2018. But fortunately, there's quite a bit more to talk about, including some more speculative discussion around Starfield. Not too long ago, I discussed everything we know about Starfield thus far. If you want a complete update, I do suggest you watch that video, but a few key details. Starfield will be a single-player experience, although there was a mention that perhaps there'll be some social features. Across every interview I could find, Bethesda, and specifically Todd Howard, has remained adamant that it will be single-player, a single-player focus, and that is the main draw of that game. But then, of course, comes the next question of when. There's been a lot of back and forth around this. One important detail is Starfield actually started production after Fallout 4 finished. It seems like they were working on Starfield and Fallout 76 at the same time at some point, so it's not like Starfield just started right in 2018 after Fallout 76. It's been being worked on for a while now. But even further, something that gets me a little bit more confident, as discovered by another YouTuber named Skullsy, as well as several community members, some recent job listings at Bethesda Game Studios get me particularly hopeful. Just recently for Bethesda Game Studios, and specifically the Rockville, Maryland branch, the people developing Starfield, a new video editor job was posted, requesting someone who would be able to capture compelling video game footage and edit into exciting promotional videos. Separately at Bethesda Softworks in Rockville, Maryland, we saw a job listing for a video producer, having basically the same requirements, although being again for Bethesda Softworks. And then also at Bethesda Softworks in Rockville, several hirings for QA testers. So on its own, that could mean a lot of things. Likely a trailer of some kind is coming, but it could be for a mobile game. It could just be for a game that they're not announcing for a year or so, but they want to have people on staff preparing for it. But for me, when you take this all together with everything else we know about Starfield thus far, it does get me even a bit more hopeful for that 2020 release date. In particular, that video editor job at Bethesda Game Studios, Maryland. It seems like now would be the time you hire a video editor for an E3 2020 release window. Although speaking of E3 2020, something else we are likely to hear more about is Ghostwire Tokyo. This is the new and up-and-coming Tango Gameworks game that is coming under Bethesda Softworks. At E3 2019, we saw the very interesting reveal trailer for this game, which did suggest that it was going to be a near-future Tokyo and some kind of apocalypse that has supernatural elements. And if you're not familiar, this is coming from the developers of The Evil Within 1 and 2. So it is something to get excited for, but something else to get excited for around this. The development time for the studio thus far has been 3 years, and 2020 marks 3 years since the last time we saw a game from the studio. So for me, I think there's a decent chance Ghostwire Tokyo does release later in 2020, and certainly seems like a very interesting concept at the very least, but another one to flesh out Bethesda's catalog for the latter part of 2020. But if nothing else, at E3 we are almost definitely going to see and hear more about this game. But then one other thing that isn't as obvious and is probably a little bit more controversial is actually Creation Club. Creation Club has had a long back and forth with Bethesda. On release, I would say it was in its worst state thus far, but since then, and particularly towards the end or second half of 2019, we saw a bit of a switch up. more periodic but also larger releases from this program. No longer would you get monthly or even bi-monthly content, but some of the most recent stuff was basically DLC size, in particular the virtual workshops. If you really like Fallout 4's workshop mode, there is nothing quite like that. I know though, there definitely is the argument that some of this content is still way too overpriced. It's definitely getting to the point now where some of it is fairly easy to recommend on sale. It is giving you a lot of content for just a few dollars. Again, there definitely is some backlash or some negativity around this, having to constantly update your mods. Now, how recently some mods aren't getting updated by their mod authors as they move away from the game, but Creation Club continues to update the game. That's why I say it's a little bit more controversial, but for those of you that have been enjoying this as of late or just want to see it succeed, in 2019 it definitely seems like they have found their stride more so than any of the previous years. So I am curious to see what they do with 2020, and I definitely know there is more stuff on the way. And frankly, that's just what we know. It seems safe to assume that Fallout 76 will have more content coming in 2020. We don't exactly know anything as far as Bethesda's Year 2 plans, outside of the fact that they plan to continue down the road with a Wastelanders style of content. Human NPCs, dialogue choices, true choice, and consequence. They've said that is here to stay, which definitely gets me excited to see what else they could do. The capital Wasteland isn't actually that far away from Appalachia. But with all that being said, it seems like Bethesda should have a fairly packed 2020, and definitely a lot of stuff to look forward to. We have Wastelanders and Doom Eternal just in the next few months. Then from there you get into pre-E3 season as some of the teasers start coming out and even some of the new announcements. Hopefully we get a Starfield trailer at this year's E3, which would really flesh out the second half of this year also. And then with that, I think Starfield could be likely along with Ghostwire Tokyo, as well as more Fallout 76 DLC and Creation Club content all throughout. But otherwise, yeah, that is a look at Bethesda in 2020. A lot is coming, mostly because of these major delays we saw last year, but it also does make you wonder what their overall plan was for 2020 even prior to those delays. They may have a few other things that were planned for this year up their sleeve that will now make it even more packed with the other things that were recently added. It is the 10th anniversary of Fallout New Vegas, just throwing that out there. As always, again, I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.